The lawyer slid a single page across the table and didn't look at my sister when he said it. This one was never signed. If that page didn't exist, how did Michelle walk away with everything? Why was I sitting here like I'd agreed to give it up? And why did my name still appear in the margin of a document I never finished reading? Michelle's new mansion had already been wired, closed, and celebrated. I'd seen the photos, white marble glass walls, the kind of place people don't question. I looked down at the page. Same formatting, same language. My initials on every other section, except the line that mattered. That transfer shouldn't have gone through, the lawyer added quietly. So what exactly had my sister done? If you're watching from somewhere else, tell me where you are and what time it is for you right now. I didn't think this story would ever leave that office, but here we are. And if you've ever been told something was for the family while it cost you everything, you'll understand why I need to tell this. 6 months before my mom passed, the house in Columbus felt smaller than it used to. Not physically, just quieter in a way that made every conversation echo longer than it should. I was there almost every day after work. Groceries, medication, checking her blood pressure, sitting with her during those slow afternoons when time seemed to stretch. My mom, Tran, had spent most of her life building stability from nothing. A small nail salon that turned into 2, a house she paid off early. Savings she rarely talked about but guarded carefully. Michelle called it a solid foundation. She said it like something that needed to be reorganized. She lived in Chicago, had for years, working in real estate. She was good at it. Sharp, confident, always 3 steps ahead in any conversation about money. When she started calling more often, at first I thought it was because of Mom's health. It wasn't. Mom needs to simplify things, Michelle said during one of her visits, standing in the kitchen with her laptop open like she was presenting a plan. If something happens, probate can get messy. Delays, legal fees, unnecessary stress. Mom sat at the table, nodding slowly. I don't want trouble for you girls. I was leaning against the counter, arms crossed. We can figure it out together. There's no rush. Michelle didn't even look at me when she responded. There is, actually. Waiting creates risk. That was the first time I noticed how she framed everything like urgency was a fact, not a choice. Over the next few weeks, she started sending emails. Not to me, just to Mom. I only saw them because Mom would forward them asking, "Is this okay?" The language was always the same. Clean, professional, detached. Temporary authority for asset management. Streamlining estate structure, avoiding probate complications. None of it sounded like anything Mom would have written or even fully understood. But Michelle explained it in simpler terms when she called. It just means I can help manage things if needed, she said. Bills, accounts, paperwork. You won't have to worry. I trust you, Mom replied once softly. I was sitting right there when she said it. I remember looking at Michelle through the phone screen. She smiled, but it wasn't relief. It was confirmation. A few days later, Mom asked me to sit with her at the dining table. There was a printed packet in front of her, neatly clipped. Michelle sent this, she said. She wants us both to look. I flipped through it slowly. Multiple pages. Legal language, but not impossible to follow. It outlined a shift in how assets could be managed, who had access, who could make decisions, how funds could be moved if certain conditions were met. Do you understand all this? I asked. Mom hesitated. Not everything. But Michelle says it's safer. That word again. Safer for who? I didn't say it out loud. Instead, I marked a few sections with a pen, questions I wanted clarified. Michelle called later that evening and we went through them one by one. She answered quickly, confidently, too smoothly. It's standard, she kept saying. Everyone does this now. You're just putting structure in place. At some point, the conversation shifted without me realizing it. It wasn't about understanding anymore. It was about getting it done. A week later, Michelle came down in person. She brought another packet. This one was thicker. Let's finalize everything, she said, setting it on the table like it was already decided. Mom looked tired that day. She'd had a rough night, barely slept. I noticed how quickly Michelle moved unclipping pages, pointing where to sign, flipping ahead before anyone could linger too long on a section. "We've already reviewed most of this," she said. "This is just formalizing it." I sat across from her watching. "Can we slow down a little?" I asked. Michelle sighed, not dramatically, just enough to signal inconvenience. "Summer, we've been over this." "Dragging it out doesn't help, Mom." Mom glanced between us. "It's okay. We can finish." I didn't like how fast it was happening, but I also didn't want to make things harder for Mom. So I started reading, page by page, carefully. Most of it matched what I'd seen before management rights access to accounts procedural language. But then I reached a section that felt different. The wording shifted. Less about management, more about ownership. I paused. "Wait," I said, running my finger along the paragraph. "This part. What is this exactly?" Michelle leaned over slightly, not enough to read it again like she already knew what it said. "It's just a contingency clause," she replied. "In case of certain situations, assets get reassigned to avoid legal complications." That sounds broader than everything else in here. "It's not," she said quickly. "You're overthinking it." I didn't respond right away. I kept reading. "Full beneficiary reassignment." I read quietly. The room went still for a second. "That doesn't sound like temporary management," I added. Michelle's tone shifted just slightly sharper. "It's conditional. It doesn't mean anything unless certain things happen." "What things?" "Specific legal triggers," she said. "It's all standard." I looked at Mom. "Did you talk about this part?" Mom frowned. I thought it was all the same thing." It wasn't. I could feel it. Something in my chest tightened, that instinct you get when something doesn't line up, but no one else is reacting to it. "I'm not signing this part," I said, setting the page down. Michelle didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She just stared at me for a second longer than normal. "Summer," she said calmly, "you're slowing everything down over something that won't even matter." "It matters if it changes ownership." "It doesn't," she replied. "Not in any practical way." "Then why include it?" She didn't answer that directly. Instead, she reached over, lifted the page, and tapped it lightly. "If it makes you more comfortable, we can come back to this one," she said. "Sign the rest." Mom looked anxious now. "Maybe just finish the easy parts first." I hesitated. Then, against my better judgment, I signed the sections I understood, one by one. Every page except that one. Michelle gathered the papers quickly after that. Too quickly. "See, done," she said, clipping everything back together. "Not all of it," I replied. She gave a small dismissive smile. "I'll handle it." At the time, I thought she meant she'd explain it later, or revise it, or remove it. I didn't think she meant something else entirely. Weeks passed, then months. Mom's condition got worse, and everything else faded into the background until the day I sat in that law office, staring at a page I had never signed, knowing somehow everything after it had still moved forward. The night it happened, it was raining hard enough to blur the windows. I remember because Mom kept asking if the sound was the pipes or the weather. I told her it was just the storm, but even then, something about that evening felt off, like everything was moving faster than it should. Michelle had driven down that afternoon without much notice. "I don't want to keep delaying this," she said as soon as she walked in, setting her bag on the chair like she was already in control of the room. "We need everything finalized while Mom is still able to make decisions clearly." Mom nodded, tired but agreeable. "I don't want to leave things unfinished." That word again, unfinished. Michelle pulled out a new set of documents, thicker than before, cleaner, more organized. Tabs, sticky notes, highlighted sections. It looked official in a way that discouraged questions. "Let's just go through it step by step," she said. "We've already discussed most of this." I didn't like how she kept saying that. We hadn't discussed most of it, not in detail, not in a way that matched what was on those pages. But the way she framed it made it sound like any hesitation now was unnecessary. We sat at the dining table, same place, same overhead light casting that dull yellow tone across the paper. Michelle sat next to Mom. I sat across from them. That detail mattered, because every time Mom hesitated, Michelle was the one closest to her, the one pointing, guiding, deciding when to move on. "Sign here," Michelle said, gently tapping the first page. Mom signed. "Initial here." She did. Page after page. I watched the rhythm of it, the pace, the lack of pause. "Can we slow down a bit?" I asked. Michelle didn't look up. "We are moving at a normal pace. It doesn't feel normal." That got her attention. She finally looked at me, expression neutral but tight. "Summer, we've been through this. Dragging it out isn't helping Mom." Mom shifted in her chair. "It's okay. I'm fine." But she wasn't. I could see it in how she held the pen, in the way she blinked longer between signatures. Still, the process continued. Then Michelle slid another set of pages toward me. "Your turn," she said. I took the stack. At first it looked familiar: acknowledgement forms, consent language, confirmation that I understood certain changes to how assets would be handled. I read slowly, not because I didn't understand, but because I didn't trust how quickly everything was moving. "Summer," Michelle said after a minute, "you don't need to analyze every line. It's standard language." "I know," I replied. "That's why I'm reading it." There was a pause. Not long, but enough. I signed the first page, then the second. Each time I made sure I understood what I was agreeing to. Management authority, access rights, administrative control. None of it transferred ownership. That was the line I was watching for. Then I reached it again. Same section as before, but this time it was embedded deeper into the packet. Not highlighted, not marked. Just there. Full beneficiary reassignment. The words felt heavier this time. I read the paragraph twice. It wasn't vague. It wasn't conditional in the way Michelle had described. It clearly outlined a transfer of primary inheritance rights under certain broadly defined circumstances. Circumstances that could easily be interpreted. "This isn't what you said it was," I said, keeping my voice steady. Michelle leaned back slightly. "It is. You're isolating one clause without context. The context makes it worse." Mom looked between us again, confusion growing. "What is it?" I turned the page toward her. "This part changes who inherits what." Michelle reached over before Mom could fully read it and gently pushed the page back toward me. "It only activates under specific legal conditions," she said. "We've talked about this. We haven't talked about it clearly." Her tone sharpened just a fraction. "We don't need to turn this into a debate." "I'm not debating. I'm asking why this is here." "For protection," she replied immediately. "Protection for who? For the estate." "That's not an answer." The room went quiet, rain against the windows, the soft hum of the refrigerator. Mom's breathing a little heavier now. Michelle exhaled slowly, like she was recalibrating. "Summer," she said softer this time, "you're making this harder than it needs to be. This is about making sure everything transitions smoothly. No confusion, no legal mess. Then why include something that can override everything else?" "It doesn't override anything. It literally does." Another pause. This one longer. I could feel the tension shifting, not just between us, but in how Michelle held herself. Less patient now, more controlled. "Look," she said, tapping the page again, "if this is the one thing you're stuck on, we can come back to it. Sign the rest." I stared at her, at the page, at Mom, who looked exhausted and just wanted it to be over. "I'm not signing this part," I said finally. Michelle didn't argue. That was the part that stayed with me later. She didn't push harder, didn't try to convince me, didn't escalate. She just nodded once, like she'd already adjusted her plan. "Fine," she said. "We'll leave that page for now." "For now." She slid the document back into the stack, separating it slightly from the others without making it obvious. Then she gathered the signed pages. "Everything else is done," she said, clipping them together neatly. Mom looked relieved. "That's it. That's it," Michelle replied. I didn't move. Something about how quickly she closed the folder, how efficiently she moved past the only page I hadn't signed, didn't sit right. "What happens to that page?" I asked. Michelle met my eyes calm again. "I'll handle it. Same words as before. Same tone. But this time I heard something underneath it. Not reassurance. Control. I watched her pack everything into her bag, zip it closed, and stand up like the meeting was over. And in that moment, I made a quiet decision. I wasn't going to forget that page. Not the wording, not the way she reacted, not the fact that she didn't need me to sign it to move forward. Because weeks later, sitting in that law office staring at a document that somehow existed without my signature, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. Michelle never needed my agreement. She just needed me to believe I still had a choice. Back in David Halpern's office, the air felt different now that I understood what I was looking at. Not confusion anymore, structure. I slid the unsigned page back toward him. Walk me through this like I'm not a lawyer. He nodded like he'd expected that. Estate documents like these work as a chain, he said, tapping the stack lightly. Each section depends on the one before it being properly executed. If a critical page, especially one that alters beneficiary rights, is not signed, then anything that relies on that change may not be legally enforceable. Meaning, he said, looking directly at me now, if this reassignment was never validly completed, then your sister may not have had the authority to move those assets the way she did. I leaned back slightly. But she already did. Yes, he said. That's where it becomes complicated. He pulled a second folder from the side of his desk and opened it. Your mother's primary accounts, he said, pointing to a set of printed statements. These were consolidated roughly 5 weeks before her passing. Shortly after, a large transfer was initiated. To Michelle, he nodded. Into an account under her control. From there, funds were used for the purchase you mentioned. The house. The mansion, he corrected gently. Yes. I stared at the numbers for a second. I'd seen transactions like this before, just not in my own life. As a financial compliance analyst, I spent my days reviewing patterns, flagging irregularities, understanding how money moved when people thought no one was watching. This didn't look random. It looked planned. Was she allowed to do that? I asked. That depends, he said. On whether the authority she relied on was valid, and if it wasn't, he paused, then she may have acted beyond the scope of what was legally granted. That was a careful way of saying it. Is that fraud? He didn't answer immediately. It could be interpreted that way, he said finally. Or it could be argued as reliance on incomplete documentation. Intent matters. Context matters. What she believed she had the right to do matters. I let that settle, because I knew Michelle. She didn't do things halfway. She didn't move millions of dollars based on assumptions. She knew, I said quietly. David didn't confirm that. He didn't need to. He flipped to another page, this one showing a timeline. Here, he said, tracing the sequence with his pen. Documents prepared. Partial execution. Funds consolidated. Transfer initiated. Property purchased. All before anyone flagged the missing signature. Yes. I looked back at the unsigned page. If that page isn't valid, I said slowly, then the reassignment never happened. Correct. And if the reassignment never happened, then the original beneficiary structure remains in effect. I felt something shift in my chest. Not relief, not yet. Just possibility. What does that mean for me? I asked. It means, he said, choosing his words carefully again, that you may still have a legal claim to those assets. Even after everything. Even after the house. Even after the way Michelle had acted like it was all settled. But she's already spent most of it, I said. Yes, he replied. Which is why this becomes less about reversing a document and more about addressing what happened after. I exhaled slowly. So what are my options? There are 2 primary paths, he said. You can challenge the validity of the transfer and pursue recovery. That could involve litigation, time, expense, and it will be adversarial. He didn't soften that word. Or, he continued, you can approach this as a negotiation. Present the issue, the evidence, and attempt to reach a resolution without formal court proceedings. With Michelle. Yes. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because of how predictable it felt. Negotiation only works if both sides think they might lose, I said. David gave a small nod. That's generally true. And right now, she doesn't think that. Probably not. Silence filled the space between us for a moment. Then I asked the question that had been sitting under everything else. If I challenge this, I said, what happens to the house? He didn't hesitate this time. It becomes part of the discussion. If the funds used to purchase it are determined to have been improperly transferred, then the property itself may be subject to claims, meaning it could be taken back, or sold, or used to settle whatever resolution is reached. I pictured it. The white marble floors, the glass walls, the photos Michelle had posted like proof of something she'd finally secured. All of it tied to a page she knew I hadn't signed. She's not going to give that up easily, I said. No, David agreed. She won't. Another pause. Then he added more quietly, you should also consider what this does to your relationship with her. I looked at him. What relationship? He didn't respond. Because there wasn't one. Not really. Not anymore. I sat there for a long moment, letting everything settle into place. The documents, the timeline, the realization that this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a decision Michelle had made, one that only worked if no one ever questioned it. I picked up the unsigned page again, ran my fingers along the edge. I want to talk to her first, I said. David nodded once. That's reasonable, but not alone, I added. And not without this. I tapped the page lightly. Of course, he said. I stood up, gathering the copies he'd given me. As I reached the door, he spoke again. Summer, I turned. If you move forward with this, he said, you're not just reopening the estate. I know. You're undoing everything she's built since. I held his gaze for a second. She built it on something that wasn't real, I replied. Then I stepped out into the hallway, the weight of the folder in my hands heavier than it should have been. For the first time since Mom passed, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was deciding. And the next step was simple. I was going to walk into that house my sister bought with money she wasn't supposed to have, and see if she still believed I'd never question it. The house was exactly how I expected it to be. Too clean, too quiet, too intentional. Michelle had always liked things that looked finished spaces where nothing felt uncertain, where every surface reflected control. The mansion sat at the end of a curved driveway in a part of suburban Chicago that didn't ask questions if you looked like you belonged. And Michelle looked like she belonged. She opened the door before I could knock a second time. Summer, she said, surprised but not unsettled. You should have called. I did, I replied. You didn't answer. She stepped aside anyway. I've been busy. Of course she had. I walked in slowly, taking in the space. Floor-to-ceiling windows, neutral tones, minimalist furniture that looked expensive in a way that avoided being obvious about it. You like it? She asked, closing the door behind me. It's a lot, I said. She smiled slightly. It's what Mom would have wanted. Stability. Something permanent. I didn't respond to that, because I didn't believe it. We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving toward the living room. Just two people measuring the distance between what used to be familiar and what wasn't anymore. I went to see David Halpern, I said finally. That got her attention. Not dramatic. Just a shift in posture, a slight narrowing of her eyes. And she asked. He showed me the documents. She nodded once like she expected that. That's what he's there for. There's a page that was never signed. Silence. Not confusion, not surprise. Just silence. Michelle walked past me into the living room, gesturing for me to follow. I did. She sat down first, crossing one leg over the other, like she was settling into a conversation she'd already prepared for. Which page, she asked. The reassignment clause. Another pause. Then she exhaled slowly. Summer. She said, her tone shifting into something calmer, more measured. We went over all of that months ago. No, I replied. We didn't. She tilted her head slightly. You signed the documents. I signed most of them. That's not how it works, she said. You don't get to pick and choose which parts count after the fact. I didn't sign the part that transfers ownership. It's conditional. It's not, I said, pulling the copy from my folder and placing it on the table between us. And it never was. She looked at it. Really looked this time. Her eyes moved across the page slower than before. Not because she didn't recognize it, but because she knew exactly what I was pointing at. The missing signature, I added. Michelle leaned back slightly. That doesn't invalidate everything she said. It might. No, she replied firmer now. It doesn't. I watched her closely. This wasn't panic. It was calculation. David said the entire transfer could be challenged, I continued. That the authority you relied on may not have been valid. She let out a quiet laugh. Of course he did, she said. That's his job. That's not an answer. It is, she replied. He's giving you the version that benefits you. And what version are you giving me? The real one. I didn't interrupt. I let her continue. You think this is about one page, she said. It's not. It's about what Mom wanted, and she trusted me to handle it. She trusted both of us. No, Michelle said sharper now. She trusted me to make decisions. That's not the same thing as taking everything. I didn't take everything, she snapped. I managed it. With full ownership. With responsibility, she corrected. We stared at each other. The space between us felt smaller now, but heavier. You knew that page wasn't signed, I said quietly. She didn't answer right away. And that was the answer. It wouldn't have changed anything, she said finally. That landed harder than I expected. You don't know that. I do, she replied. Because I know how Mom thought. I know what she was worried about. You think this was about money? It wasn't. It was about making sure everything didn't fall apart. By putting it all in your name, by putting it in the hands of someone who could actually handle it, she said. There it was! Not new, but clearer now. You mean not me. She didn't soften it. You're good at your job, she said, but you hesitate. You second guess. You get stuck in details. I read what I sign, and you get lost in it, she replied. Mom didn't have time for that. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I didn't let it take over. Reading is what stopped me from signing that page, I said. And it didn't matter, she shot back. Because the outcome would have been the same. Then why remove it? That stopped her. Just for a second. But it was enough. You said it didn't matter. I continued. So why take it out of the process? Why not just have me sign it if it was so insignificant? Michelle looked away briefly toward the windows. Then back at me. You're turning this into something it's not. No, I said. I'm finally seeing what it is. Another silence. Longer this time. Heavier. Then she said it. I assumed it would be fine, she said. That it wouldn't come back like this. Not a denial. Not really. You assumed I wouldn't question it. She didn't respond. Because she didn't have to. We both knew that was true. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the edge of the table. This isn't just about what you thought I said. It's about what you did. And what are you going to do, she asked. There it was. Not defensive. Not emotional. Just direct. I held her gaze. I haven't decided yet. She nodded slowly. But you're here, she said. So it's not nothing. No, I agreed. It's not. We sat there in that quiet, perfectly designed room. Everything in place. Everything controlled. Except this. Except the one thing she hadn't accounted for. I stood up first. Michelle didn't. Summer, she said as I picked up my folder. I paused. If you push this, she continued, you're not just questioning a document. I know, I said. You're tearing everything apart. I looked at her, at the house, at the life she'd built on top of something that never fully existed. Maybe it shouldn't have been built like this in the first place, I said. Then I turned and walked toward the door. And for the first time since all of this started, Michelle didn't try to stop me. That night, I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't scroll through my phone. I didn't try to distract myself from what had just happened in that house. I sat at my kitchen table with the folder open, every page spread out in front of me like pieces of something that finally made sense, but only if I was willing to look at all of it, not just the part that hurt, the part that mattered. I called Lena. She picked up on the second ring. You sound like you found something. I think I found enough, I said. I just don't know if it's enough to prove anything. Send me what you have. I scanned everything, every page, every signature, every timestamp, and sent it over. Within 20 minutes, she was at my apartment laptop already open before she even took off her jacket. Lena Park didn't waste time on emotions. That's why I trusted her. Walk me through it, she said, pulling the documents onto her screen. I did. The timeline, the signing, the page I refused. The way Michelle had removed it and kept moving forward like it didn't matter. Lena didn't interrupt. She just listened occasionally, zooming in on a section or pulling up metadata from the file properties. After a while, she leaned back slightly. Okay, she said. There are two things happening here. Go on. First, what you already know. That page wasn't signed. And based on how this is structured, it's not optional, it's foundational. That's what David said. Good, she replied. Because he's right. She clicked into another file, the scanned version Michelle had apparently submitted as part of the final documentation. This is where it gets interesting. I leaned closer. What am I looking at? Version history, Lena said. Or at least what we can reconstruct from it. She pulled up the metadata panel. Look at the timestamps. I followed her cursor. Original creation date, modification date, export date. They didn't line up the way they should have. This file was altered, she said. Altered how? Not in the obvious way, no fake signatures or anything like that. But sections were rearranged. Pages were removed, possibly replaced. With what? That's the question. She opened another window, this one showing the scan I had compared to a secondary copy I didn't even remember keeping. Do you see this? She asked. I squinted. At first it looked identical. Same formatting, same text. Then I noticed it. A slight shift in spacing between paragraphs. A header that sat just a fraction higher on one version than the other. This one, Lena said, pointing to the version Michelle had used, was flattened after edits, which means whatever changes were made before that are now baked in. So we can't undo it. Not directly, she said. But we can show that it happened. She highlighted the page order. Look here. In your version, the reassignment clause appears before the final acknowledgement section. In this version, she clicked. It's missing entirely. I felt my stomach drop. Missing. Not just unsigned, she said. Gone. I stared at the screen. That's not what I saw at the signing. I believe you, Lena said. And that matters. She pulled up the timeline again. Now look at this. The file was modified the same day everything was finalized. After the signing session you described. So she removed the page, or replaced the document set with a version that excluded it, Lena corrected. Either way, the final package that was submitted doesn't match what you were asked to sign. I sat back slowly. That's not just incomplete execution, I said. No, Lena replied. That's selective execution. The words landed differently. More precise. More intentional. Can we prove that I asked? Not with absolute certainty, she said. But we don't need absolute certainty. We need enough inconsistency to challenge the validity of the transfer. I thought about what David had said. Intent matters. Context matters. What about intent, I asked. Can this show that she knew what she was doing? Lena hesitated. Intent is harder, she said. But this helps. A lot. Because it shows awareness of structure. You don't accidentally remove a critical page and still proceed with everything else like nothing changed. She said it wouldn't matter. Lena looked at me. That's not something someone says if they think it doesn't matter, she replied. We sat in silence for a moment. Then she leaned forward again, scrolling through the email chain Michelle had sent to my mom. Here she said. I leaned in. One email stood out. Subject final documents. Ready for submission. Attached a PDF. Timestamp late evening. The same night as the signing. Open it, Lena said. I did. It was the finalized version. The one without the reassignment page. My chest tightened. She sent this to Mom, I asked. Yes, Lena said. And look at the message. I read it slowly. Everything is complete. No further action needed. I've handled the remaining formalities. Handled. The word echoed in my head the same way it had that night at the table. I'll handle it. Except now, I understood what that meant. She didn't forget, I said quietly. No, Lena replied. She made a decision. I closed the laptop halfway, not fully shutting it just enough to create space between me and the screen. What does this give me? I asked. Leverage, Lena said immediately. Strong leverage. For negotiation. Yes. Or for litigation if it comes to that. I nodded slowly. And if I push this, Lena didn't sugarcoat it. Then you're not just questioning the outcome, she said. You're questioning the process. And that makes everything unstable. Good, I said. She studied me for a second. You're not saying that like someone who's unsure anymore. I'm not. That was new. Not anger. Not even resentment. Just clarity. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the quiet street below. For months, I had let everything sit the way Michelle left it. Assumed there was nothing to question, nothing to challenge. But now I knew something she hadn't expected me to know. She didn't just move faster than me. She changed the rules while I was still reading them. I turned back toward the table. Help me organize everything, I said. Clean, clear, no gaps. Lena nodded. Already started. And then I looked down at the folder again, at the missing page, at the version that shouldn't have existed. Then I go back to her, I said. And this time, I close the folder. She doesn't get to tell me what matters. By the time I walked back into David Halpern's office, everything was organized, not just gathered, structured. Lena had helped me build a timeline that didn't rely on assumptions, dates, file versions, email chains, the exact sequence of what was signed, what was removed, and what was submitted. No emotion, just facts. David flipped through the binder slowly, not interrupting. Every now and then, he paused on a page, reading a section twice, then moving on. When he reached the email, Michelle sent my mom the one that said everything was complete. He stopped longer. That's helpful, he said quietly. She knew I replied. He didn't confirm that directly, but he didn't challenge it either. He closed the binder and leaned back. This changes the posture, he said. In what way? Before this was a question of incomplete execution. Now it's a question of whether the execution was selectively altered to produce a specific outcome. I sat down across from him. Say that in plain terms. It means he said we're no longer just arguing that something was missing. We're suggesting that something was intentionally excluded. I nodded. And that matters. It matters a great deal, he said. Because intent affects how aggressively a court or the other party responds. I let that settle. What are the risks, I asked. He didn't hesitate. If you move forward formally, this becomes adversarial very quickly. Your sister will likely retain counsel. There may be depositions, financial tracing, potential claims of wrongdoing on both sides. On both sides, she may argue that you were aware of the structure and chose not to participate fully, that you're raising concerns now only because you don't like the outcome. That's not what happened. I understand that, he said, but litigation is not just about what happened. It's about what can be argued. I exhaled slowly. And negotiation? He tapped the binder. With this, he said, you have leverage. Significant leverage. Enough to make a credible threat of litigation without immediately initiating it. And if she calls that bluff, then you decide whether you're prepared to follow through. Silence stretched between us. Then I asked the question I'd been circling since last night. If this goes all the way, I said, what does the outcome look like? David folded his hands on the desk. Best case, he said, the court determines the reassignment was invalid. The original structure is restored. Assets are recalculated. Any funds improperly transferred may be subject to recovery. And the house, it becomes part of that recovery conversation, meaning she could lose it. Yes, I nodded once. And worst case, he didn't soften it. The court finds that despite the missing page, the overall intent of your mother and the executed portions of the documents support your sister's actions. In that case, the transfer stands. So I walk away with nothing. That is a possibility. I leaned back, letting both outcomes sit side by side. Win everything. Or confirm I never had anything to begin with. And in between, I asked. Most cases settle somewhere in the middle, he said. A negotiated redistribution, partial recovery, terms that both sides can accept without prolonged litigation. That sounded like the most likely path. Not clean, not satisfying, but real. What would you recommend? I asked. David studied me for a moment before answering. I would recommend starting with a formal demand, he said. Present the inconsistencies. Outline your position. Indicate your willingness to pursue legal action if necessary, and give her a chance to respond. Yes. I nodded slowly. And if she refuses, then we escalate. The word hung in the air. Escalate, not react, not defend. Move forward. I looked down at the binder again. At the timeline, at the page that wasn't there, at the version that shouldn't have existed. Draft it, I said. David reached for his pen. We'll need to be precise. I want it clear, I added. No threats, no emotion, just facts. That's the most effective approach, he said. He started outlining the structure as he spoke. Identification of the estate, summary of the document execution, description of the missing page, evidence of post-execution alteration, legal implications, proposed resolution. Proposed resolution, I repeated. Yes, he said. You need to decide what you're asking for. That was the part I hadn't fully answered yet. I knew what I could ask for. Everything. But that wasn't the same as what I would ask for. I want time to think about that, I said. Of course, he replied. But we'll need direction before we send anything. I stood up gathering my things. As I reached the door, he spoke again. Summer. I turned. You have more control here than you think, he said. But control comes with responsibility. I held his gaze. I know. And I did. Because for the first time since all of this started, I wasn't trying to catch up to something Michelle had already decided. I was setting the terms. That night, I didn't open the binder again. I didn't need to. I already knew what it said. Instead, I sat on my couch staring at my phone longer than I should have. Michelle's name was still there, unchanged, like none of this had happened. I thought about the house, about the way she said it wouldn't matter, about the email. Everything is complete. I opened a blank note and started typing. Not a message to send, just clarity. What I wanted, what I didn't, what mattered, what didn't. By the time I finished, it was simple. I didn't want to take everything from her, but I wasn't going to walk away from what was mine. Not again. I picked up my phone and finally opened our message thread. No long explanation, no build-up. Just one line. We need to resolve this. I'm sending something formal. I stared at it for a second. Then hit send. The reply came faster than I expected. 3 dots. Then, do what you need to do. No apology. No denial. No attempt to explain. Just permission. Or maybe dismissal. I set the phone down slowly, because in that moment I understood something I hadn't fully accepted before. Michelle wasn't going to meet me halfway. She was going to make me choose how far I was willing to go. And now, I had to decide exactly what that meant. The mediation room was smaller than I expected. Neutral walls, a rectangular table, 2 pitchers of water no one touched. Michelle arrived before me. That didn't surprise me. She was already seated when I walked in, her posture, straight hands folded loosely in front of her like this was just another meeting she intended to control. Her attorney sat beside her, a man in his 50s, composed, observant, the kind of person who spoke only when it mattered. David was already there on my side. No one smiled. No one pretended this was anything other than what it was. The mediator introduced himself, went over the structure, the expectations, the goal resolution without escalation. Then he looked at me. Would you like to begin? I didn't rush. I opened the binder, turned to the first section, and spoke the way I did at work when I needed people to follow a sequence without losing the point. 6 months before my mother passed, a set of estate documents was prepared, I said. Those documents included both management authority and a clause that reassigns beneficiary rights. I slid a copy of the unsigned page across the table. This clause was never executed. Michelle didn't touch it. Her attorney did. He scanned it once, then again, more slowly. I continued. Despite that, a finalized version of the document set was submitted, one that excluded this page entirely. I placed the second document beside it. The version that was actually used to move assets does not match the version presented during signing. The mediator leaned forward slightly. Michelle still hadn't moved. Funds were then consolidated and transferred, I added. Those funds were used to purchase property currently held in Michelle's name. Now she looked at me, not defensive, not nervous, just steady. When I finished, the room was quiet. The mediator turned to Michelle's attorney. "Would you like to respond?" He folded his hands. "Certainly," he said. "Our position is that the executed documents taken as a whole reflect the intent of the decedent Ms. Lynn Tran to place financial authority and control with my client. Authority," David said calmly, "is not the same as ownership. That distinction becomes less rigid when the overall structure supports consolidation of decision-making," the attorney replied. "It becomes very rigid when a required clause is not signed," David said. The mediator raised a hand slightly, keeping the tone even. "Let's focus on the documents," he said. Michelle finally reached for the page. She picked it up, glanced at it briefly, then set it back down. "That page didn't change anything," she said. It was the first time she'd spoken. Her voice was calm, controlled, but I heard the edge underneath it. "It changed everything," I replied. "No," she said. "It didn't. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. It's the only section that transfers ownership," I said. "Without it, you had authority to manage, not to take." Her attorney shifted slightly. "Take is not an accurate characterization," he said. "Then use a different word," I replied. "The result is the same." The mediator stepped in again. "Let's keep this constructive." David leaned forward. "The inconsistency here is not minor," he said. "We have a document set that was altered after partial execution. A key clause was removed. The remaining portions were used to justify a full transfer of assets." "That's your interpretation," Michelle's attorney said. "It's supported by the timeline," David replied. I slid the printed email across the table. "Sent the same night," I said. "After the signing," with the altered version attached. Michelle's attorney read it, then looked at her. That was the first real shift. Not in what was said, in what wasn't. "Michelle," he asked quietly. She didn't look at him. She looked at me. "I didn't think it would matter," she said. There it was! Not a denial, not an explanation, just the same sentence. This time in a room where it couldn't be softened. The mediator let the silence sit for a moment before speaking. "That statement is important," he said, "because it goes to awareness." Michelle's attorney exhaled slowly. "We acknowledge that the execution was not perfect," he said. "But imperfection does not automatically invalidate intent." "Selective removal of a clause is not imperfection," David replied. "It's a decision. And that decision was made in the context of managing an estate under time pressure," the attorney countered. "Pressure doesn't rewrite ownership," David said. The room tightened again. The mediator stepped in. "Let's move toward resolution," he said. "Because both sides have arguments that could be explored further in litigation." He turned to me. "Summer, what are you asking for?" That was the moment everything narrowed. All the documents, all the analysis, all the time I spent trying to understand what happened. It came down to this. I looked at Michelle, really looked at her. Not the house, not the decisions, just her. "I'm asking for the estate to be recalculated based on valid execution," I said. Her jaw tightened slightly. "And the property," the mediator asked. "If it was purchased with improperly transferred funds, I said then it needs to be part of the resolution." Michelle leaned back. "This is unbelievable," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "It's exactly what the documents support." Her attorney leaned toward her, speaking low enough that I couldn't hear the words. She listened, didn't interrupt, then nodded once. He turned back to the table. "We are willing to discuss a settlement," he said, "but not under the assumption that the entire structure collapses." "That's not an assumption," David said. "That's a legal possibility." "And it's not the only one," the attorney replied. The mediator raised his hand again. "Let's define a range," he said. "What is each side prepared to accept?" Michelle looked at me again. This time there was something different in her expression. Not confidence, not control. Something closer to calculation under pressure. "You're really going to do this," she said. I didn't answer the question directly. "I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen," I said. Silence again. Then she asked it. "Not to the mediator, not to the attorneys. To me. If this goes your way, you're taking everything." I held her gaze, because that was the version she understood. Win or lose, all or nothing. And for the first time, I realized something she hadn't. It didn't have to be that. But I hadn't said that out loud yet. No one spoke for a few seconds after Michelle asked it. "If this goes your way, you're taking everything." The question stayed in the room longer than it should have. Not because it was dramatic, because it revealed how she had framed this entire situation from the beginning. Control or loss, nothing in between. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked down at the documents in front of me, the unsigned page, the altered version, the email that tied everything together. Then I looked back at her. "That's not what I said," I replied. Michelle leaned forward slightly. "But it's what you could do." Her attorney didn't interrupt. Neither did David. They were both watching the same thing. I was what I chose to do with the leverage I had. "I could," I said. "But that's not the point." "Then what is the point?" she asked. This time there was something under her tone that hadn't been there before. "Not arrogance, not control. Something closer to uncertainty. The point," I said, "is that you made a decision that changed everything without making sure it was actually valid." "I did what needed to be done," she replied quickly. "You did what worked for you," I said. She opened her mouth to respond, then stopped. The mediator leaned in slightly. "Let's focus on resolution." I nodded once. "I'm asking for the estate to be recalculated based on what was actually executed," I said. "Not what was assumed." And the house, Michelle pressed. "It's part of the equation," I said. "Not the entire outcome." That was the first shift. Small, but real. Her shoulders dropped just slightly, not enough for anyone else to call it out, but enough for me to notice. "You're not trying to take it," she said. "I'm trying to correct what happened," I replied. Her attorney spoke quietly to her again. This time she didn't just listen. She asked him something back. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the change in her expression when he answered. "Calculation." "Reassessment." For the first time since I walked into that room, Michelle wasn't arguing. She was thinking. The mediator stepped in again. "Let's put some structure around this," he said. "Summer, are you proposing a full reversal or a negotiated redistribution?" "Negotiated," I said. David glanced at me briefly. "Not surprised. Just confirming." And Michelle, the mediator, continued. "Are you open to that framework?" She exhaled slowly. "Yes," she said. It wasn't enthusiastic. It wasn't generous. But it was the first time she'd agreed to anything that wasn't already in her favor. The conversation shifted after that. Less about proving who was right. More about what could actually be done. Numbers came up. Valuations. What had been transferred. What had already been spent. What could realistically be recovered without forcing everything into a prolonged legal fight. The mansion sat at the center of it, not just because of its value, because of what it represented. If the funds used to purchase the property are partially subject to recovery, David said then the property itself becomes part of the settlement discussion. Michelle's jaw tightened again, but she didn't interrupt. Her attorney spoke instead. "There are options," he said. "Refinancing, partial buyout, structured repayment. Those are all viable." David agreed, as long as they reflect the corrected distribution. The mediator nodded. "So we're not talking about immediate loss of the property?" "No," I said. "We're talking about accountability." Michelle looked at me again, longer this time. "You're really serious about this," she said. "I've been serious," I replied. "I just wasn't informed." That landed. Not as an attack, as a fact. The room went quiet again, but it felt different now. Less tense, more settled. Like the direction had been chosen even if the details weren't final yet. After another round of discussion, the mediator summarized. "We have a framework," he said. "Recalculation of the estate based on valid execution. A negotiated adjustment that includes the property, and a willingness on both sides to avoid litigation if terms can be agreed upon." He looked at Michelle. Do you accept that direction as a starting point? She didn't answer immediately. She looked down at the table, then back at the documents, then finally at me. When she spoke, her voice was quieter. Yes, she said, not because she wanted to, because she understood the alternative. The meeting didn't end with everything resolved. It couldn't. There were too many details to finalize, but the power had shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just enough that the next steps wouldn't be decided by her alone. As we stood to leave, Michelle spoke again. Summer. I turned. For a second, it looked like she was going to say something else. Something personal. But she didn't. This isn't how I thought this would go, she said instead. I nodded. Me neither. That was all. No apology. No reconciliation. Just acknowledgement. And for now, that was enough. Because the real outcome wasn't decided in that room. It was going to be written in the agreement that came next. And this time, every page was going to be signed. The final agreement took 3 weeks, not because it was complicated in a technical sense, but because every line was read, questioned, and confirmed. No assumptions, no shortcuts. No, I'll handle it. David sent me each revision as it came in. I reviewed them the same way I reviewed compliance reports at work. Slow, methodical, focused on what was actually being said, not what someone wanted it to sound like. Michelle did the same. I could tell. The language changed over time. Less confident, more precise, like she was no longer writing from a position of control, but from a position of exposure. The structure was clear. The estate would be recalculated based on what had been validly executed. The assets would be redistributed accordingly. The mansion would remain in Michelle's name, but not untouched. She would refinance drawing from the equity to satisfy the adjusted distribution. The amount wasn't everything I could have claimed, but it was what I decided to ask for, not because I couldn't push further, because I didn't want to. The agreement included timelines, payment structure, legal acknowledgement that the original transfer had relied on incomplete execution, no admission of wrongdoing, but no denial either, just correction. The day we signed, we were back in a conference room, different building, same kind of table. Michelle sat across from me again, but this time the space between us felt clearer, not smaller, just defined. David walked us through the final document. Once signed, he said this resolves all claims related to the estate. I nodded. Michelle didn't say anything. When it was my turn, I read the final page one more time. Every clause, every condition, every signature line. Then I signed. Michelle signed after me. No hesitation, no comment, just a quiet, deliberate motion. It was done. A month later, the first payment came through. Not a surprise, not a victory, just confirmation that the agreement was real. I used part of it to pay off my student loans, something I had carried for years while believing there wasn't enough for both of us. The rest stayed where it belonged, under my control. No shared accounts, no assumptions, no one else handling it. I didn't go back to the house. I didn't need to. Whatever it represented before, it didn't anymore. Michelle and I didn't talk after the signing, not right away. There were a few messages about logistics, deadlines, confirmations, nothing personal. And that was intentional, because I understood something now that I hadn't before. Resolution doesn't automatically rebuild trust. It just closes the gap between what happened and what's acknowledged. Trust is something else entirely. One evening a few months later, I was sitting in my apartment going through old files. Not legal ones. Photos. There was one of Mom standing in front of the salon she used to run, smiling the way she only did when she felt like things were stable. Not perfect, but secure. I realized then that everything Michelle said about protecting the structure wasn't completely wrong. She just decided she was the structure, and removed anything that didn't fit that version, including me. The difference now was simple. I didn't need to be included in her version of things anymore. I had my own. The last thing David said to me after the signing stayed with me. "You handled this carefully," he said. "Not everyone does. At the time, I didn't know how to respond. Now I do. Careful doesn't mean passive. It doesn't mean letting things go. It means knowing exactly where the line is and deciding what happens when someone crosses it." Michelle crossed it. I didn't ignore it. I didn't try to destroy her for it either. I corrected it. And then I stepped back. Because boundaries aren't about control, they're about clarity. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt clear. There's something a lot of people don't say out loud when it comes to family and money. Sometimes the deepest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from people who believe they're justified. They tell themselves it's for stability, for efficiency, for the bigger picture. And somewhere along the way, they stop asking whether it's fair. If you've ever been in that position where something was taken, decided, or rearranged without you, you know how confusing it feels at first. You question yourself before you question them. That's why boundaries matter, not as punishment, but as protection. You can choose not to escalate everything into a fight. You can choose not to take everything back even when you technically could. But choosing peace doesn't mean accepting what's wrong. And forgiveness doesn't mean giving someone the same access they misused before. Sometimes the most important outcome isn't what you recover. It's what you refuse to lose again. If you've been through something similar, I genuinely want to hear your perspective, what you would have done, or what you learned from it. And if this story resonated with you, you can follow along for more like this. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.